being on the programme today. Over the weekend, we've seen some scientists coming out to say that the lockdown is being eased too quickly. Are you concerned that politicians are no longer following the science?
Well, politicians always have to make the decisions and make the judgments. It's not unusual for scientists to take different views, but from the perspective of accountability, I think it's very clear that scientists advise and politicians decide. For what it's worth, I agree with the opinion that has been expressed over the weekend that we've got to be very cautious. This virus hasn't gone away. There is still a significant risk that it could run out of control again. That's why in Scotland we are moving very slowly, very cautiously. We've just gone into phase 1 of our route map out of lockdown, and that expressly recognises that in that phase there is a significant risk that the epidemic is not fully contained. So our focus has been very much on allowing some more outdoor activity because we know that the risks of transmission outside, while they're not zero, are lower than they are indoors. And we're asking people to continue to follow all the rules on physical distancing, hygiene, making sure that they are not allowing the virus to spread between households on hard surfaces. So Scotland will continue to take a very cautious, very slow and steady route out of lockdown, and we will make sure we monitor the impact of that all along.
You say that you're prioritising outdoor activities in Scotland, but you could also argue that you're prioritising social activities over things that will kickstart the economy. 8 people can now meet outside, you can play golf or tennis, you can go sunbathing in the park, but you don't have to go back to school, you don't have to go back to work if you work inside. I mean, is this not just doing what will be popular rather than things that actually in the long term will benefit the economy?
It's trying to take a balanced view, and I make no apologies for that, although I have to say, these are judgments and there's no absolute rights and wrongs in all of this, and all of us will make mistakes along the way. But I do think it's important that we get the economy moving as quickly as it is safe to do so. I certainly want to see that as First Minister, so some outdoor work is allowed to resume in Scotland now. But, I also think it's really important that we recognise the things that matter most to people's quality of life, and that is family, friendship, love. These are all things that people have had to sacrifice over the past couple of months, and I don't think it would be right to, when we've got such limited room for manoeuvre, and that's the key point here, we don't have much room to spare, we don't have much flexibility, so I think it would be wrong to use all of that to get the economy moving again and end up in a situation where people are going back to work, being told they have to go back to work and remain in lockdown for the rest of the time. That wouldn't give very much quality of life to people. So it's about trying to strike the right balance, but crucially making sure that the steps we take are not running the risk of allowing the virus to spread out of control again. So this is always going to be a difficult balance, but it's the responsibility of politicians like me to try to get that as right as we possibly can.
Yeah, as you say, it's clearly a political decision, even if it's based on as much science as possible. In the meetings and the briefings that you've been a part of, have you picked up a sense recently that scientists are worried about some of the political decisions that are being made?
I guess there is probably a concern, and I'm not speaking on behalf of scientists here because I've not had this conversation with any of them, but I think if we look and observe the media coverage in recent weeks, UK-wide, if I was a scientist, I think I might have a little concern that politicians were looking to try to blame me for any mistakes that had been made, and I don't think that would be right to do. Politicians like me, it's a tough place to be at a time of crisis like this, but we are elected and we are accountable. So we have to listen to the advice. I think it's really, really important that we listen to the scientific advice. We try to understand that as much as possible. But ultimately, we have to apply our judgment to that and take the decisions. And I think it's really important that we're very clear about that.
So do you think, then, just trying to read between the lines slightly, do you think that politicians in Westminster have been trying to hide behind the science?
Look, I'm not here to criticise other politicians. I've tried very hard throughout this crisis not to do that. We're all in a really tough situation. These are the hardest decisions I've ever had to take in my political career, and I'm sure that's the case for others. We're all trying to do the right things, but the point I'm making here is a straightforward one. We're in these positions, we're elected to these positions to take the tough decisions, not just for the easy times, but for the hard times as well. And I think it's really important that separation of responsibility is understood. Our advisors advise us, but we have to take the decisions. And I think it's very important for all of us to be clear about that.
OK, now, I just want to talk to you a bit about the situation in care homes in Scotland. Because between the 16th of March and the 24th of May, there were 94% more deaths in Scottish care homes than the average. 46% of deaths linked to coronavirus in Scotland happened in care homes. In England and Wales, that figure was just 28%. And it does seem that, one of the great tragedies of the pandemic has been the failure to protect some of our most vulnerable people. Is this a matter of personal regret for you?
Every single death from this virus is a matter of deep personal regret to me. I'm sure, again, I'm not the only leader that says some of these decisions and the implications of what has happened over the past couple of months will live with me for probably the rest of my life. But can I just look at the situation in care homes specifically? Because it's often put to me that the death rate, for want of a better expression, in care homes in Scotland is higher than it is in England. And I just don't believe that is the case. And I should preface my comment here by saying I don't think any level of deaths is acceptable and it shouldn't be a competition. Excess deaths in Scotland overall, but also in care homes, is lower than in England, but more of them are in care homes have been attributed to COVID than is the case in England. So about 70% or slightly more than that of excess deaths in Scotland are attributed to COVID, whereas for some reason it is less than 50% in England. In Scotland, if you die of, say, a stroke, but you also happen to have the virus, you will be included in the deaths from COVID. So it's not for me to explain England's figures, but I think here there is, at least on the face of it, a question of under-reporting in England. I'm confident that Scotland's figures are robust, and the percentage of overall deaths that have sadly and tragically happened in care homes in Scotland is much more in line with some of the figures we see in other countries as well.
Whatever happens, and I accept your point on different nations having different ways of recording things, 94% more deaths in Scottish care homes. I mean, this is a huge number of people, just as in England as well. We were talking about political decisions earlier. Yeah. Just as in England, the Scottish Government moved people from hospitals to care homes in order to free up space in hospitals for what you warned could be a tsunami of COVID patients. In March, 921 patients in Scotland sent from hospital to care homes. Was that a mistake?
Look, I think it's very easy right now and to some extent understandable, because this is so tragic and grim and horrible, to look back and apply the knowledge we have now to the decisions we took then. And I think it is right that there is full consideration in due course and full scrutiny of these decisions so that there is accountability, but also that we learn lessons for the future. But if I can take you back to that earlier period, and consider the fact that the older people that were in hospital, the so-called delayed discharges, they didn't need to be in hospital, they had no medical need to be in hospital. We were expecting, and in some cases saw, an influx of coronavirus patients into our hospitals. It would have been unthinkable simply to leave older patients where they were in hospital. That would also have put them at serious and significant risk. So what we did was put in place a system of risk assessment for older people being discharged from hospitals, and gave guidance to care home providers about the isolation and infection prevention and control procedures they should have been following. So my point is not that what has happened in care homes is anything other than tragic and needs to be carefully and seriously considered. It's simply that at all times, I can only speak for myself and my government, we have sought to take the best decisions we could based on the knowledge and information we had at the time. In the period since, we've learned so much about this virus that we simply didn't know then. Chief amongst those things, possibly, is the risks of asymptomatic transmission. Back then, the view was that people who didn't have symptoms, either because they were pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, didn't shed the virus. We've got a very different understanding of it now. So as our knowledge has developed, we've tried to adapt the response that we have as well.
You were saying that it would have been unthinkable to have left some of these vulnerable people in hospitals where they could have contracted COVID-19, but of course there's risks of moving them to care homes if they had COVID-19 as well. And on March the 26th, the advice from the guidance from the Scottish Government was that individuals being discharged from hospital do not routinely need confirmation of a negative COVID test. I mean, that wasn't changed until April the 22nd. Will you accept that that was a major error?
Yeah. Well, again, that's the point I'm making about knowledge changing. So back then, rightly or wrongly, there wasn't the same understanding of asymptomatic transmission. So what people like me were advised back then is that the tests weren't reliable in people who didn't have symptoms. Now, I should say,
so was it an error? It's a direct question. Was it a mistake to not be routinely testing people?
If I apply the knowledge I have now, then you can it leads you to that conclusion. But I didn't have the knowledge that I have now back then. And that is not me trying to make excuses. Believe you me, I am not interested in that. I'm simply making the point that we've got a virus here that is new, unique, unprecedented. It's still only, 150 or so days old. And we have been learning about it all along. So if I take what we know now about asymptomatic transmission and apply that to that period, then we may well have taken different decisions. But we didn't have that knowledge then. And that's the key point here. At all stages, we've taken the best decisions based on the information we had. But, trust me, I am not saying for a second that I don't deeply regret every single death from this virus. It is absolutely awful, the number of people, and older people in particular, who've lost their lives to this virus. And I guess that's why I keep saying to people, please continue to follow the guidance and the rules, because the virus hasn't gone away, and it's really important that we don't become complacent in the face of it.
Just a quick thought to end. You're saying there about how important it is for people to follow the guidance and the rules. When that rule was simply to stay at home, it's quite easy. Now, of course, things are more nuanced as the lockdown measures start to be changed. Is it a matter of regret that we aren't seeing exactly the same rules across all nations of the United Kingdom as we move out of the lockdown?
Look, I think we have to all take the decisions we think are right and try to collaborate and share our views as much as possible. And that's the nature of devolution. But it is also, frankly, in the nature of a virus that perhaps is at different stages in different parts of the UK. So what I've always been at pains to say is that because we're taking different decisions in Scotland, just as the Welsh government are taking different decisions, as is the Northern Irish government, it doesn't. Well, firstly, it's not political or constitutional, and it doesn't mean that we don't continue to try to coordinate our decisions across the UK, 4 nations of the UK, as much as we can.
OK, Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Thank you.
Thank you.